The morning in Brookside was serene, the sky a crystal clear blue, and the sidewalk outside the local cafe bustled with patrons enjoying their morning drinks. Among them, sitting quietly at a small table, was Leo Ivanov, a blind man who visited this establishment every day. Beside him was Odin, his loyal German shepherd, standing watch. Odin was more than a guide. His solid posture and commanding presence spoke of years of training as a former service dog. Now retired, Odin had dedicated his life to protecting Leo, offering not just guidance but an emotional connection the man deeply cherished. As Leo silently sipped his coffee, the roar of three motorcycles shattered the calm atmosphere, parking nearby. The loud engines drew the attention of everyone around. Three men dismounted the bikes dressed in leather jackets with bright patches. They seemed casual, but the way they scanned their surroundings added a note of tension. Victor, the group's leader, had an imposing presence, laughing loudly and confidently. He gestured animatedly as he talked with his friends, asserting his dominance over the space. Odin, ever vigilant, pricked his ears, sensing something unusual. The men began to stroll between the tables, observing people. Victor noticed Odin and Leo, his gaze lingering on the German shepherd for a moment. "Quite a big dog you've got there," he commented, his tone causing Odin to stare intently at him. Victor smirked at his own comment and leaned forward slightly as if testing the dog's reaction. Odin remained still, but his posture held something, a silent threat that spoke volumes about his assessment of the situation. Victor, perhaps wanting to prove something, made an exaggerated gesture with his hands as if joking. "Is he really as smart as he looks?" he asked his friends, who laughed awkwardly. The atmosphere grew tense. Odin remained motionless, but his eyes never left Victor. Leo, unable to see the exchanged glances, asked, "Is everything all right?" His voice was calm but held a shadow of concern, as if he felt the change in Odin's behavior. The silence at their table contrasted with the chatter around them. Odin was a dog trained for high-stress situations, and his experience had taught him to remain calm until the right moment. Victor, realizing he hadn't gotten the desired reaction, stepped back slightly, but his laughter rang out again. Leo, still unaware of what was happening, reached out to touch Odin. "You all right, buddy?" he asked affectionately. Odin responded by shifting closer to him, but his eyes remained fixed on Victor, who was beginning to feel the weight of his own actions. The atmosphere seemed to shift in the small outdoor seating area of the cafe. As Leo finished his coffee, the laughter from Victor and his group grew louder, now with a provocative edge. Odin stayed in place next to Leo, but any attentive observer could see he was on high alert. His muscles were tense and his eyes tracked Victor's every move, as if anticipating something yet to happen. He wasn't just a dog, he was a guardian, trained to protect at any cost. Victor, feeling like the center of attention, approached Leo's table. He seemed completely oblivious to the other patrons watching. "That's a cute dog you have, huh?" he said playfully, though with a slight tone of disregard. Leo offered a weak smile, trying to defuse the situation. "Thanks, Odin is my best friend." Victor tilted his head, feigning curiosity. "Odin, huh? Name like the Norse gods. Let's see if he lives up to it." Without letting Leo respond, Victor made a sudden movement, reaching out to touch Odin's muzzle. It was a gesture that might have seemed harmless from the outside, but for Odin, trained to recognize threats, it was enough to trigger his instincts. The German shepherd didn't attack but took a step back, emitting a low, warning growl. The tension thickened, and an awkward silence fell. "Easy there, pal," said Victor, raising his hands as if he were just joking, but there was a glint of challenge in his eyes. Leo, still not grasping what was happening, placed a hand on Odin's neck, trying to calm him. "Sorry if he startled you," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. Victor just laughed, but his pride seemed stung by the dog's reaction. He stepped back, but his friends began to egg him on. "What, Victor? Letting a dog put you in your place?" That one phrase changed the mood. Victor, wanting to impress, looked at Odin with a smile full of intent. The group leader glanced around and noticed many people were watching the interaction, some even discreetly filming with their phones. Perhaps this made him hesitate for a second, but he wasn't one to back down. "Relax, guys, it's just a dog," he said dismissively. But Odin knew the difference between play and danger, and though Leo couldn't see it, he began to feel that something was wrong. "Odin, what's wrong?" he whispered. The German shepherd simply kept his eyes fixed on Victor, as if awaiting the next move. Victor took a few steps back, but it wasn't a retreat. His friends continued to laugh, taunting him with jeers, and this seemed to fuel the biker's already bruised ego. He paused for a moment, staring at Odin as if daring the dog to make a move. The tension in the air was almost tangible. Leo, still unable to see the hostile glares or the looming threat, tried to diffuse the situation with a comment. "He doesn't like it when people act too pushy. Maybe he got scared." But Victor ignored the comment. He looked at his friends, then at the people around, as if seeking approval for what he was about to do. With a cold smile, he stepped toward Odin, reaching out his hand again. Odin, still sitting, growled low, a clear warning for anyone who knew how to read it. The sound was almost inaudible, but powerful enough to make onlookers flinch with unease. Yet Victor seemed determined to test the limits. "Come on, big guy," said Victor with forced laughter. "You as tough as you look?" This time, before the shepherd could react, Victor lightly kicked the leg of Leo's chair, a movement that caused Odin to rise in one smooth, firm motion. That gesture was the last straw for the animal. Odin didn't lunge forward, but his posture changed. He was now fully on alert, his body tensed like a spring, ready to uncoil. The crowd around them began to whisper, and several people raised their phones to record the scene. Leo, sensing the change in Odin's behavior, frowned. He ran his hand along the dog's neck, trying to soothe him, but now he knew something was wrong. "What is going on here?" he asked loudly, his expression troubled. Victor just laughed, but it was a nervous laugh. He knew he was playing with fire, but seemed unable to back down in front of his friends and the crowd. "Nothing much," he replied, gesturing for Leo to relax. "Just fooling around." At that moment, a woman sitting nearby stood up. "Hey, you need to stop this," she said firmly. "Leave the dog alone." Her voice cut through the chatter on the sidewalk, and for the first time, Victor hesitated. Embarrassment began to creep over him, and he looked around, realizing the disapproving stares. Odin didn't move from his spot, but continued to watch Victor, ready to react to any sign of danger. The tension still hung in the air like a rope about to snap. Victor narrowed his eyes at the woman who had confronted him but said nothing. The crowd around them grew nervous, exchanging glances between him, Odin, and Leo, who now seemed even more confused. Feeling the mounting discomfort, Victor took a step back, but it wasn't a final retreat. He had something else in mind. "Relax, we're just having fun," he said dismissively, trying to salvage what was left of his image. But inside he felt a need to assert his dominance. Odin, on the other hand, remained motionless, watching every move with surgical precision, as if reading the biker's next move. Leo tugged on Odin's leash, muttering, "Odin, calm down. What's happening?" He couldn't see Victor's threatening posture, but he felt the tension in the air. Odin was no ordinary dog. He was trained to protect, and at that moment, he was on full alert. Leo trusted him completely, but the growing tension made him nervous. The crowd around them seemed to freeze, a heavy silence making everything more alarming. Suddenly, Victor made a sharp movement. He pretended to retreat, but in a burst of impulsiveness, he kicked one of the nearby chairs, pushing it toward Odin. The sound of metal clattering against the ground echoed down the street, and several people gasped in surprise. Odin reacted instantly, jumping aside and dodging the chair with impressive agility. The dog growled louder now, his protective stance becoming even more obvious. It was a clear warning that he would tolerate no further provocation. "Hey, stop that!" the woman shouted again, this time with more authority. Several other people began to speak up, asking Victor to stop. He, however, seemed a prisoner of his own ego. "What's the problem? Never seen someone play with a dog before?" he said, trying to maintain a carefree attitude, but his hands were clenched, and it was clear he was no longer in control. Odin stood firm, his eyes locked on Victor, analyzing every movement, ready to act if necessary. Leo finally understood that something serious was happening. He slowly stood up, gripping Odin's leash tightly. "Can someone please tell me what is happening here?" he asked loudly, his anxiety now obvious. But before anyone could answer, Victor stepped forward, leaning toward Leo as if trying to intimidate him directly. The crowd held its breath, and Odin, as if understanding the threat to his owner, lowered his head slightly, prepared to defend Leo at any cost. The tension reached its peak as Victor took another step toward Leo. He was now so close that his presence was oppressive even to someone who couldn't see. "What's the matter, pal? Hiding behind your dog?" Victor taunted with a bitter laugh that seemed to hide his own discomfort. Leo, meanwhile, remained calm, though his voice trembled slightly. "Odin never hides me from anything," he replied, gripping the dog's leash tightly. "He's here to protect me, and it seems he knows something I don't." Odin remained still, but the growl in his throat grew louder with each second. The crowd around them, initially hesitant, now began to whisper more loudly, clearly uncomfortable with Victor's behavior. An older man sitting at a nearby table finally stood and intervened. "Hey, this is getting out of hand. You should leave before something bad happens." But Victor, driven by pride and peer pressure, ignored the advice. He looked at the man as if he were just another obstacle, but growing unease began to show on his face. Suddenly, the silence was broken by an unexpected sound. Odin barked loudly, a deep, firm bark that made Victor instinctively step back. It was a sound that could not be ignored, and its meaning was clear. The dog was ready to act. The crowd reacted with shock. Some kept filming, others stepped back. The energy had completely shifted. Leo, noticing Odin's bark, understood that something serious was about to happen. "Odin, it's okay, I'm okay," he said, trying to calm the shepherd. But Odin kept his eyes on Victor as if saying he didn't trust those words. Then, in a last attempt to save face, Victor impulsively stepped forward, reaching out to shove Leo's shoulder. It was a quick movement, but not quick enough for Odin to miss. The German shepherd reacted in an instant, placing himself between Victor and Leo with one swift motion that put him directly between the biker and his owner. Odin didn't attack but stood firm, baring his teeth slightly, a clear warning that this needed to end right there. Complete silence fell on the street. Victor froze, unable to react, while Odin's gaze seemed to pierce through him. Leo, now aware that something very serious had just happened, lifted his head and said firmly, "I think you'd better leave now." The crowd around them began to murmur, this time against Victor. He looked around, realizing he had lost control of the situation. Without another word, he slowly retreated, trying to hide his embarrassment. His friends silently followed, and within seconds the group disappeared around the corner. The morning, which had begun with the soft tones of routine, was now filled with murmurs and tension. Leo felt the air around him change. Even without seeing, he could sense the energy had shifted. The sound of motorcycle engines faded into the distance, replaced by the muffled noise of people discussing what they had witnessed. Odin beside him remained alert, his body still tense, but there was something else, a slight tremble in his front paws. Leo, feeling the vibration through the leash, crouched down and touched the shepherd's fur. "Odin, it's okay now, buddy," he murmured, trying to soothe him. But Odin seemed hesitant, his gaze still fixed on the spot where Victor had disappeared, as if he knew that man was not just a temporary threat, but a problem that could arise again. Leo, gently touching Odin's muzzle, whispered, "You sense something I don't you?" These words, though simple, carried a deep weight. They reflected the unwavering trust he had in his faithful companion. The crowd around them began to slowly disperse, but a few people remained nearby, still curious. The woman who had confronted Victor took a few steps toward Leo, her face wearing a concerned expression. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice still shaking with adrenaline. Leo nodded, but his furrowed brow betrayed the worry inside him. "I'm fine, but Odin, he's never reacted like that before. He knows when something's wrong, and it worries me." The woman crouched, observing Odin carefully. That dog, he's not ordinary, is he? Leo sighed, a mix of pride and melancholy on his face. No, he was a service dog, trained to protect, to serve, and, if necessary, to sacrifice everything. But that was years ago. I thought he'd left all that behind. Now he's my guide, my family. The woman looked into Odin's eyes as if trying to decipher something only he knew. Maybe he never forgot who he is, she replied, almost in a whisper. The older man who had intervened earlier came closer. Listen, son, he began, his voice deep and filled with wisdom. Dogs like him have instincts that go beyond our understanding. He reacted that way for a reason. You should trust him and perhaps be on your guard. That man, Victor, didn't seem like the type to give up easily. The stranger's words resonated with Leo, who gently tightened Odin's leash. The German shepherd looked up at him, his eyes conveying what words never could. The moment was interrupted by a distant sound, the rumble of engines. They didn't come closer but didn't fade away completely either. Leo took a deep breath, stroking Odin's head. Maybe it's just my imagination, he thought. But the tremor in Odin's body suggested otherwise. He didn't know that this incident was just the beginning of something much larger. Something that would test not only Odin's devotion, but also Leo's strength in the face of the unexpected. The tension seemed to have finally faded, but not for Odin. Though he now lay next to Leo, his breathing was still faster than usual, his eyes alert to every movement around them. Feeling the dog's unease, Leo decided it was time to leave the cafe. He took the leash and slowly stood up, offering a nervous smile to the few people still nearby. Thank you for staying. I think Odin and I need some fresh air, he said, before starting to walk down the sidewalk. The walk back home was one Leo and Odin took every day, but that morning, every step felt laden with meaning. The silence was broken only by the sound of Odin's paws on the pavement and the soft jingle of the leash. Leo couldn't see the world around him, but Odin's behavior spoke louder than any sight could. He was tense, his posture signaling that he was on high alert. It was a subtle but constant reminder that something still wasn't right. When they arrived at Leo's small apartment, he unclipped the leash, allowing Odin to move freely through the space. You're acting strange today, buddy, Leo remarked as he fumbled for Odin's water bowl on the kitchen counter. The German shepherd moved slowly through the apartment, sniffing every corner as if conducting an inspection. Finally, he stopped at the door, sitting quietly but with ears perked, listening for any sounds from outside. Leo noticed this, frowning. What is it, Odin? You never do that. As Leo sat on the sofa trying to process the morning's events, he began to recall stories he'd heard about Odin before adopting him. He knew Odin had a past as a service dog, but he'd never learned all the details. Odin had been involved in complex operations where his ability to sense danger had saved lives, and now it seemed those instincts were resurfacing. Are you trying to tell me something, boy? Leo asked, stroking the dog's soft fur. Odin responded with only a slight wag of his tail, but his eyes remained fixed on the door. Outside, the distant rumble of a motorcycle sounded again, almost imperceptible. Odin raised his head, his entire body tensing once more. Leo didn't hear the sound but felt the dog's reaction. He placed a hand on Odin's shoulder, as he always did to comfort him. Whatever it is, we're in this together, he said softly. Little did Leo know that this promise would be tested very soon, in a way he could never have imagined. Evening fell quietly, draping the small neighborhood in a blanket of calm. Leo sat at his modest dining table, neatly slicing an apple while Odin rested beside him. The tension from the morning hung in the room, an unspoken weight that neither Leo nor Odin could ignore. Leo's fingers touched Odin's fur as he spoke almost to himself. Maybe I'm just overthinking it, huh, buddy? He muttered. Odin's ears twitched, his sharp eyes fixed on the front door as if he anticipated something Leo couldn't see. Outside, the silence was torn by the distant hum of engines. At first quiet, it grew louder, more distinct. Odin immediately stood up, his body frozen as he stared at the door. Leo, sensing the change, froze. "What is it, Odin?" he asked, his voice even but with an edge of worry. The engine stopped suddenly, followed by a heavy silence that pressed against the apartment's thin walls. Leo reached for his phone, his fingers trembling slightly. "Stay calm," he whispered to himself, though his heart pounded in his chest. After a few moments, a knock came at the apartment door, sharp and deliberate. Odin emitted a low growl, positioning himself between Leo and the door. Leo paused before standing, his hand gripping Odin's leash tightly. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice firm but wary. There was no immediate answer, only the sound of muffled voices outside. Leo's pulse quickened. He could feel Odin's tension through the leash, the dog's readiness to defend if necessary. "I'm not opening the door until you say who you are," Leo declared. Finally, a voice answered, deep and vaguely familiar. "Relax, man, it's just me, Victor." The word sent a shiver down Leo's spine. Odin barked sharply, his growl deepening. Leo's grip on the leash tightened as he stepped back, creating more distance from the door. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice edged with suspicion. Victor's tone changed, trying to sound casual, but the underlying threat was clear. "Just wanted to talk, man. No hard feelings about earlier, right?" Leo didn't answer immediately, his mind racing, weighing his options. Odin, sensing the seriousness of the moment, remained poised and alert. The silence stretched, and Leo could feel the weight of Victor's presence right outside the door. "You need to leave," Leo finally said, his voice level but resolute. The muffled voices outside grew louder, followed by the sound of receding footsteps. But Odin didn't relax. Neither did Leo. Something about this encounter felt unfinished, like a storm gathering strength just beyond the horizon. The uneasy silence that followed Victor's departure was short-lived. Leo paced the living room, his fingers lightly tracing the familiar contours of furniture as he tried to calm his thoughts. Odin, however, was restless. He went to the window, his large body tensing as he sniffed the air and looked into the night. "What is it, Odin?" Leo asked himself more than the dog. The anxiety in his chest grew, a gnawing certainty that Victor wasn't done with whatever game he was playing. After a few minutes, the sound of footsteps broke the silence. They were muffled, deliberate, circling the perimeter of the apartment building. Odin let out a sharp bark, his body coiled like a spring. Leo froze, his heart hammering in his chest. He reached for the phone on the countertop, his fingers dialing 911. "Stay calm," he whispered to himself, though every nerve in his body screamed otherwise. Odin moved to stand by the door, his growl low and steady, a warning that reverberated through the small apartment. Leo connected with the emergency dispatcher, his voice trembling as he explained the situation. "There's someone outside my apartment," he said, gripping Odin's leash tightly as the dog's growl grew louder. "I think they mean harm." The dispatcher assured him that officers were on the way, but the minutes felt like hours. Outside, the footsteps grew closer, more deliberate. Then came the sound of something scraping against the window pane, a subtle, ominous noise that sent a chill down Leo's spine. The scraping stopped abruptly, followed by a muffled curse from outside. Odin barked again, this time louder, his body pressed against the door as if daring the intruder to approach. Leo, holding Odin's leash firmly, retreated to a corner of the room, his mind racing. He felt helpless, relying on Odin's instincts and the hope that help would arrive in time. "They're coming, Odin," he murmured, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "Just hold on." Finally, the faint wail of police sirens pierced the tense air. The footsteps outside ceased immediately, followed by the sound of someone running away. Odin remained on alert, his growl softening but not disappearing entirely. Leo exhaled, trembling, clutching the phone as he whispered into the receiver. "They're here. Thank you." Relief washed over him momentarily, but it was tinged with the realization that this wasn't over. Victor had crossed a line, and Leo knew he needed to prepare for whatever would happen next. Flickering red and blue lights lit the street with an eerie glow as two police officers approached Leo's apartment. Odin, still on alert, stood by the door, his ears pricked, body rigid. Leo cautiously opened the door, feeling a rush of cool night air against his face. "Officers, thank you for coming," he said. His voice even despite the fear lurking in his chest. Odin didn't relax, his sharp eyes looking toward the shadows outside as if sensing danger still lurked. The officers asked Leo to recount everything, taking notes as he described the earlier confrontation with Victor and the sinister sounds around his apartment. "He didn't do anything physical," Leo admitted, gripping Odin's leash tightly. "But he's unpredictable, and I know he'll be back." One officer crouched to pet Odin, though the dog remained on edge, his gaze fixed on the perimeter. "Your dog's instincts are sharp," the officer said. "If he's this agitated, you're right to be cautious." As the officers examined the area, they found fresh footprints near Leo's window. They followed the trail but found no sign of Victor or his friends. "He's probably long gone," one said, though their tone wasn't reassuring. They advised Leo to stay inside, keep his phone close, and call if anything else happened. "We'll increase patrols in the area," another officer assured him, "but if you feel unsafe, don't hesitate to leave for the night." Leo nodded, though he had no intention of running. This was his home, and he wasn't about to let Victor take that from him. After the officers left, the apartment felt heavier with silence. Leo sat on the edge of his bed, Odin lying at his feet, still watchful. He leaned over to stroke the dog's back, the familiar motion soothing him. "I don't know what's next, Odin," he murmured, "but I know you'll be ready." Odin's ears twitched at the sound of his voice, and for the first time that evening his tail gave a faint wag. It was a small moment of confidence amid the uncertainty. Leo finally fell asleep, though his rest was fitful and interrupted. Odin, ever vigilant, remained by the door, his body a protective barrier between Leo and the outside world. The bond between them had never felt stronger, forged in the fire of shared fear and trust. Whatever Victor was planning, Leo knew one thing for certain. He wasn't facing it alone. Odin was more than a guide or a former K9, he was a guardian, a partner, and a reminder of the strength that comes from standing together.